This is Guitarist Denis Taaffe, and I'd like to welcome you to the making of Modern Rock Guitar Volume 6, Ice. Okay, and this is a really early album, and up to that time, I did my debut album in 1999, my first album, which was Modern Rock Guitar Volume 1. And then I did 2, 3, 4, and 5. And 5 was actually a live concert album, so was 4. So here, one of the big things is I definitely... with loops and things, definitely started using that, and this was the basis of future albums, all the way up to album 200. So this is kind of not exactly the start of it, but definitely the idea of looping and improvising and that kind of thing. And there's quite a few things I want to mention here. Okay, and for those who are familiar with my music, basically I use guitar and guitar loops done on the fly, which is basically where I play a guitar and my pedal board loops, records part of it, of what I'm playing, and starts to loop it over and over again. And then I put layers on top of that. And then for bass, I emulate bass on guitar by dropping it an octave and looping that as well. And basically, I'm improvising not only during the track, but the track itself. I usually start off with a little basic idea or something that sounds good to me, and then I say, okay, well, what would sound good with that? What would be a accompanying part? And it's just idea after idea. It's almost like recording on a 4-track, but it's on the fly. You have to think and listen and react to what you're hearing on the spot instead of, practicing a part, going back, and playing it, and then going back and listening back and finding another part, that kind of thing, or having it worked out ahead of time. Okay, and so this was really the start of that, improvising and things, except there was, I had already done Modern Rock Guitar Volume 2, which was definitely a looping album. Okay, now, there's a couple other things. Let's take a look at the cover. And back then, I wasn't really doing album covers. I did a couple, I guess. But this was done by a friend of mine called Paul Cisco Bajong is his name. And he's a keyboardist. But he actually made the album cover. If you'll notice, it's called Ice, and so it has these glaciers in the water. It looks like some rocks, and then a Les Paul there. He spent a lot of time on that album cover. In fact, of all my albums, this is probably the most complicated album cover. I would say this one and the 1991 one. Now, this album was done in 2005. Okay. So by that time, I didn't have very many albums under my belt, like I do now, I guess. Okay. And the other thing is, when I was doing videos, I used a lot of this music, and it reminds me of hearing the soundtrack to those videos is very much a lot of this material. Okay, so let's start off with the first one called Autofocus, and it comes in at 14 minutes and 37 seconds, so it's a really long album track. Let's take a listen to that. Okay. There's some swells, but they were actually swelled and then put backwards. So it gives you this kind of building sound. And there, unfortunately, I'm trying to use that delayed guitar, but back then, it wasn't synced to MIDI, so the timing wasn't very good, so it didn't quite fit exactly. And there I was using I believe the Line 6 Pod XT Live, which I still have here. Coming in. I believe this was a drum machine. Yeah, Alesis. And let's fast forward that to about 7 minutes, 36 seconds. There I'm adding some clean guitar. Alright, let's fast forward again. Let's go to the 10:58 mark. Yeah, notice that clean guitar has some delay on it. Okay, and so this track, one thing I wanted to mention here is the album was called Ice, and the reason it was called Ice is because a lot of these tracks don't have proper bass lines. They have some low sounds, don't get me wrong, on the guitar, but I hadn't quite perfected the, lowering the guitar an octave and looping it like I did on later albums. And so gave it a kind of a real cleanish sound without that low end. So I called it Ice for that reason at the time. Okay, the next one, called Zen Guitar. Z-E-N Guitar. Let's take a listen to that. It's actually a really short track. It's like a minute long. 1 minute and 11 seconds long. Let's take a listen to that. And this is a riff. It's actually a D minor 7 chord. And as I recall, this is whenever I would just start playing at that time, I would always start out playing that chord, making sure all the equipment was in good working order. Okay, let's take a listen. Yeah, right there. It was really hard for me at the time to get this kind of clean sound, because my amps weren't very clean at all. So I had to use a lot of noise reduction. You know, this was way before Albion amps and things. In fact, I was using Behringer Ultra Twin solid state amps, I believe. Okay. Okay, let's move on to the next track. And the next track is called Movie 1. Remember, I told you I used a lot of this music for videos on YouTube that I was doing. You know, some were just silly, just for fun. Others were guitar videos, that kind of thing. Okay, so let's take a listen to that. And again, it's another really short track, about 1 minute and 37 seconds. Ah, yes. And this has a lot of delay guitar, and it actually worked out pretty well, timing-wise. Those drums, definitely an Elisa's drum machine. But I definitely like the delays. In fact, it's very similar to the type of music I'm doing now, really. So I was surprised to hear that it was so close to what I'm doing now, you know. You know, 12 or 13 years later. Okay, let's move on to the next track, which is called Kronos. And I believe I saw a movie called Kronos, you know, at the time. I think it was a horror movie, as I recall, but it was some kind of a... Alright, well, let's take a listen to it. And this is a long track, too. 12 minutes and 14 seconds. You know, back then, my albums were really long. I mean, like 70 minutes. Compared to now, where they're like, you know, 45 minutes. So they're really long. And they have long tracks as a result. Alright, let's take a listen to that one. Oh, yeah. I use this track so often to make my videos. And notice it starting to layer delayed guitars, and they're, you know, different timings. Like one's playing dotted 8 notes, and the other is playing a different delay. I'll tell you a secret about those drums. I know exactly, I remember now. Not only was I using a Elisa's drum machine, an original SR16, right? Which is like pretty darn old. But it was good. It was a good drum machine. But then for the cymbals, I would also use a Zoom drum machine. I think it was a Zoom Rhythm Track 123, something like that. Just for the cymbals. Unfortunately, if you listen, the cymbals were basically going crazy all the time. It gives you this kind of washed out drum sound. Let's take a listen a little more here. Yeah, you see. I mean, I don't think a drummer would be hitting the cymbals constantly. Anyway, fast forward. Now, there's another thing that's different here, and if you listen to the guitar solo, this was before I owned the Parker guitars. So you're really hearing all this was done with a Schecter. And Schecter, it really is kind of a Schecter Ibanez guitar. It's a guitar that was my real first guitar. And I owned it for, I played it, I should say, for about, 20 years at that point at least. And I still have it. It was actually originally built out of Ibanez parts, and the Schecter was the neck, part of it. And it had Seymour Duncan pickups, as I recall. I actually bought it from my guitar teacher, Chris Hadding, who's the one who built it. And I used that guitar up to album 50, I believe. Yeah. And at 50, I kind of retired it and got the Parker guitars. So it definitely has a different sound to it. If you hold on, I'll show it to you. So here it is. And this is the guitar I used for this album. And this was my favorite guitar. It just had a great neck to it, and I learned to use it pretty well, and it had a distinct sound to it, to be sure. And I keep it for sentimental reasons. I don't really play it that often, And from what I recall, from albums 50 to the present, which is 279, all those albums were done with Parker guitars. Okay, so let's move on to the next track, which is called Victory. I'm sorry, After the Victory. That's very funny. The reason is, it's called After the Victory, is because this is the sense of that I got from it at the time. After achieving your goal, the sensation that you would have. Okay, so let's take a listen to that. up the volume so you don't hear the pick noise, and it gives you this kind of keyboard sound. Now here's what's interesting. I use an original boomerang pedal board, kind of noisy, and I had to use noise reduction to try to get rid of the kind of hiss here. And a lot of times what I would do is play a chord, swell it, and then lower it an octave as well, and really make it sound like a keyboard. Delay on the clean guitar kind of gives it a spacey sound. Yeah. Unfortunately, amp hiss and effects noises, were a real problem for me then, and it wasn't until I got the Albion amps, which were so quiet, that it was hard for me to do these recordings and try to make it clean, especially on softer tracks. Okay, let's move on. The next one is called Arrival. I think I've used that title for several different tracks over the number of albums, but anyway, this is for CD 6, right? Okay, here it is, Arrival. Let's hear that. Notice I'm not a drummer, and so I would use presets and things from the drum machines. But I promise you, I don't think any drummer would be playing quite like that. Okay, timing-wise. But I tried to try different presets and things. So let's hear that again a little bit more. Okay for this track. Oh, it's a strange drum beat, definitely. Okay, let's move on to the next track, Destination. Notice the drum pattern hasn't changed from track 6 to track 7. That's just laziness on my part, I'm afraid, of not changing the drum machine pattern. But very much like the delayed guitar ideas here, and the variety of ideas, and techniques for such an early album. And this is another long track of 10 minutes. And there's that delayed guitar, kind of pattern playing, much like I do now. Okay, let's fast forward to the 7 16 mark. Now, well, I guess one of the fun things is, because I wasn't tied down to a MIDI sync track, you know, as far as delays, I would try all kinds of outrageous timings and so on and try to make it fit the track. And I think it worked out okay here. Let's hear. There's kind of those chord swells. Okay, move on to the next track. Track 8 is called Love. 7 minutes long. Let's hear that one. Ah, yes. And here's the chord swells and the guitar. Decent track here. Yeah, lots of swells, chords and single notes. And now starting to layer the single notes. Yeah, that's a good track there. Definitely using those layers and so on. And those swelled notes and chords, you know, I use so often. Unfortunately, I wear out those volume knobs and they become scratchy, and I need to replace them, or else you hear that scratchiness. You know, kind of that. And you hear that on the recording, which you don't want to. Okay, now number 9 is Reprise. Right? Obviously a reference to Jimi Hendrix. Reprise, right? On his albums. Okay, let's take a listen to that. Okay, and back then I would just start looping a chord or loop and try to work off of that. Interesting intro there. And there's that delayed guitar, but remember, not synced to MIDI. And when I realized it didn't quite fit quite right, I kind of abandoned it. Alright, let's fast forward a bit to the 3-minute mark. There's that Elisa's drum machine. Notice no bass. No bass line. Yeah, I remember during this album is really when I discovered that swelling of the notes you know, that swell technique, not just for the chords, but for single notes as well, and creating melodies out of that. Okay, now track 10. I believe it's called Time Control. So let's take a listen to that. It's a combination of swells and clean guitar. Yeah, I really like this track. So here you can really hear the fascination I had back then of trying to discover different sounds I could get on the guitar. And they're still trying to use the delay, but because it wasn't synced to MIDI, I couldn't really use a lot of pattern playing, which I do later on, starting with volume 200. 200 on, I was synced with MIDI delay-wise, so the timing was on, whereas here, it wasn't. Okay, and now the last track, of course, called Ice. And let's hear that one. Yes, and I use this track a lot on videos as well. So, because the delays wouldn't sync correctly, I said, okay, well, I'll just play the guitar parts, and if you hear it, I get that dun, 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 making it sound like a delay, but there's no delay. More guitar there. Just the way I'm playing it. Kind of muting the notes. And this is 7 minutes long. So here I'm gathering up ideas. Let's go to the 4:58 mark. I've heard this album. Yeah, I really like the guitar sound here. And that's it. That's Modern Rock Guitar Volume 6 Ice. Now, I really like this album. You have to consider the limitations that I was working with, and discovering all these things and trying to incorporate them into my music. Granted that, the drums are a bit lacking. But at the time, that was a big step forward from what I was using before, Now, technology has gotten much better. Elisa's came out with that SR18, better drum machine, and then you have the drum patterns, drum loops, that kind of thing. So overall, there are some very nice tracks on this album. Even though it's 2005, I'm really pleased with it. I do find it interesting that none of the tracks have any bass bass on them, but it doesn't really take away from the album. And that's why it was called Ice to begin with. And what I noticed is I really was developing a lot of the sounds and techniques that I use today. Technology's gotten a little bit better at the time. So overall, definitely a good album. And I especially like some of the tracks because I've heard them so many times on YouTube videos I did, years ago. So whenever I see one of those videos, I hear tracks from Modern Rock Guitar Volume 6. And the Schecter guitar, and the Schecter guitar, was a pretty good guitar. I mean, the neck was just fantastic. Definitely a different sound than the Parker guitars I use today. Had a 5-way switch, much like a Stratocaster and things. And I played it for years and years and years. So it's nice to hear that guitar again here. So definitely, it's an important album, really, for me, because of the ideas and the techniques that are starting to develop here. And some of the tracks are really, really decent, I think. Some of the tracks, well, there's a couple in there that are just okay. But the majority have really decent sounds. Yeah, like I said, that I even use today. Alright, so that's it. So we'll see you next time. Bye.